I'm going to show you how to make a basic cube. I've rolled out my clay slab. I use the slab roller. You can also use a rolling pin. Either way will work. Slab roller is going to give you a more consistent slab. So I've rolled out my slab and I've carried it over to my table on my piece of canvas. If you could see this slab up close, you'd see that it's got the texture of the canvas on it. So I want to erase that. If we have a surface, like a texture on our pieces that wasn't intentional, we want to get rid of it. So I'm going to use a rib. We've got different types of ribs in the classroom. We've got a wooden rib. We've got 2 metal ribs, which are flexible, whereas the wooden rib is not. We also have a rubber rib, which is probably the most flexible. I'm going to use the metal rib that is not serrated. So we have 2 metal ribs in the classroom. One is serrated, so it's got teeth all over it. I'm going to use the one that is not serrated, and I'm going to use the rounded side, not the flat side, and I'm going to compress my slab. So compressing my slab with the rib means doing this, and this will eliminate the canvas texture. It will also help to make the clay a little bit stronger. Anytime we compress clay, it can help to make it stronger and potentially help eliminate cracks. And that's especially true with slabs. So I compress the clay. One thing that I want to be really careful with when using the metal rib is that whenever I compress, there's always going to be a buildup of clay on this edge, and your gut instinct is going to want to be to do this to get the clay off. And it's really easy to turn it just slightly the wrong angle and slice your thumb. So you want to be careful when you're using the rib and get in the habit of scraping the clay off on your table or on the extra canvas. So I'm going to erase the texture on both sides, flipping it carefully. Chances are, if you're making a cube, you're not going to see the inside of it, but it just depends. Maybe you will if you don't enclose your cube in, but it's just a good idea to compress both sides and clean it up. I'm going to move through this fairly quickly. I'm going to start with a ruler, and I'm going to cut my pieces out for my cube. You can use a fettling knife to cut, or you can use a needle tool. Fettling knife is going to be a little sharper by the nature of the blade. The needle tool has got a rounded tip to it, so for whatever reason, I tend to always grab my needle tool. So I would take more time doing this, but I'm going to move through this quickly and cut off my rough edge here. And I always cut on the other side of the ruler just in case I don't go and go into my slab. So I'm going to cut a straight edge to begin. And anytime you have excess clay, you should put it back in your bag or cover it as soon as possible so it doesn't dry out. And let's say I'll cut this edge. I'm going to make a cube that I want to be 3 inches by 3 inches. I would start to cut out, mark off my measurement, and cut out all my walls. So 3 inches, 6 inches, 9 inches, 12 inches, go to 3 inches. And again, I'm going to work through this pretty quickly. And I would be taking more time if I were you. And follow my marks and start to cut the individual walls. All right, so now I have plenty of 3-inch pieces. Put that aside. That should go back in my bag. And now I'm going to take the first piece. And you can see this is plenty thick. You could probably even go a little bit thinner if you wanted, but you definitely don't need clay thicker than this. And I'm going to put that down. This is going to be my base for my cube. Then I'm going to take one of my walls and I'm going to attach it on top of the base. Whenever I attach 2 pieces of clay, unless I'm going to smear them thoroughly together, I need to slip and score. So I'm going to scratch or score the bottom of this piece where it's going to attach to the base, and then I'm going to score here as well. So I score, and I'm not timid about my scratches or my scores. I want them to be 1/8 or 1/4 of an inch deep to ensure that it's a good join. So I've scratched both that are going to come together, and now I have my slip for slipping and scoring. So this is your joining slip. I scooped this out of the recycle bucket. It's just really wet clay. That's roughly the consistency of cottage cheese, something like that. You can use a paintbrush if you want to put the slip on. You can also use your finger. And I don't want to be timid with my slip usage either, because I want to make sure that this joins and sticks together. So I slip pretty well. I scored 2 spots. I'm slipping 1. Then I take my slip spot and I generally give it a little shimmy and a little push down to get that join. And I've used enough slip that it's oozing out, which is good. That means that I used a good amount of slip, which is what you want. Every time you have a join, like what I just slipped and scored together, you have to line that seam with a coil. So I take a little bit of clay, roll out a simple coil, and then put this on it, and then blend that in. So I'm reinforcing that to make it a little bit stronger. And the key to blending the coil in easily is that this is nice, soft clay. If you blend in a coil and try and erase it by smearing it in and it takes forever, you want to get softer clay because it should smear with ease. So I shouldn't have to spend more than about 10 seconds smearing this in and erasing it. I don't care how clean this part looks too much because this is going to be enclosed and I'll never see it. However, the outside seam, I also need to line with the coil. So I do want to make sure that I erase that pretty well so I don't see it anymore. So I line that seam and I blend it in. And again, you see I pretty much erased it, and that's because the clay that I used was nice and soft. Now I move on to the next wall. So now I need to scratch here on the bottom. Right? Nice, deep scratches. And then I'm also going to scratch up the wall here. And then I'm going to scratch this wall. It's going to touch here, and then this wall. So every point of contact needs to be slipped and scored. So I've scratched pretty well and pretty deep. Then I take my slip, which is your glue. And this is not colored slip. You want to make sure that you don't use colored slip for this. So you use the clay slip, which is just from the recycle bin, because you don't want to take a chance on having colored slip ooze out and being able to see it. So I've scratched, and put slip slurry on one of them. And now I'm going to set it down and give it a little shimmy and a little shimmy, and it comes together. And now we're going to see that my measurement is a little bit off. And that's because of the thickness of my slab. So I rolled out the slab and cut 3-inch panels, 3 by 3. And so because of the thickness of the slab, where the walls are coming together, it's pushing this out a little bit further. That doesn't bother me. It's probably unlikely that you're going to care about that specific of a size of your slab, but if you are, you need to take the thickness of the slab into consideration if you want to think about specifically the size of your cube. So I'm just going to carefully cut this down and remove that extra bit. And then now I need to line, again, all my seams. But now I have a seam here. And because this is the inside, I'm not going to spend too much time worrying about how nice that looks. Line this seam. And then again, line this seam, and spend more time blending that in so it looks nice and erases. And I can already tell that this clay that I rolled the slab out with isn't nearly as soft as what I have in my bag. So I'm going to get a little bit softer clay, which will make it easier to hide these seams. The seams should take you no more than 10 or 15 seconds to erase by smearing them in, because we like it to look clean and erase as if there was never a coil reinforcement there at all. So then and then I carry on and do this wall, cut off my extra, do my final side here, slip and score that, line all your seams with the coil. And then when it comes to your last one, you can make a decision. Maybe you want to have it open. Maybe there's something about the like negative space in here that speaks to your, your sculpture that you're building or your concept, and you want to be able to see in there. If you don't, you're going to slip and score this on. Obviously, you can't line the interior seams with the coil because you can't get your finger in there. So you're going to be nice and thorough about the ones on the outside. This has got trapped air in it. So before you wrap it up for the night, you have to put at least 1 or 2 needle tool holes somewhere. And I'd suggest not putting it right in the middle, but coming in at a join or a seam so you don't see it. You can always change that spot later. But if you have trapped air, you're going to need to make sure that there's a place for the air to escape as it starts to dry a little bit. Once this sets up a bit, you can use your rasp. So we've got 3 different rasps in the classroom. One that's got a little bit of a rounded curve to it. So this is probably not the right one for our cube. But then we've got these 2 flat rasps. These are basically the same tool, just different. But they're like cheese graters where I can sharpen all of my edges, and I can make this, if it's my goal, I could make this a perfect cube. The key to using the rasps is that if I used it right now, this clay is so soft that it just starts to gum up the rasp, and the rasp isn't as effective. So usually I try and wait until the next day or let this sit for maybe 30 minutes and then try the rasp and see if it's successful. If it just gums it up, you need to let it dry a little bit more. The last thing to remember when you're working with slabs like this is if I cut out all my shapes, let's say I still had all my walls and sides here, and I wasn't ready to construct them on that day, if I put this on my wear board with all my other walls and then wrap this and come back 4 days later, the board pulls out moisture from this clay, and at that point, these might be too dry to construct and you have to start over. So if you're not coming back the next day, I wouldn't put it directly on a board. I'd put your plastic down and then put these on the plastic and wrap it entirely. You'd rather come back and have it be too soft than come back and have it be too stiff and have to start over because they're too stiff to slip and score together. Making a cube this size, I could construct it in the same day that I cut these shapes out. If I wanted to make a cube that was this big, there's no way that the clay would allow me to construct it well because it would only droop as I had my large walls and panels. So like with everything, moisture and timing, the moisture level of the clay and the timing of the material is going to dictate what you can do in any given sitting. Small cubes, you could probably cut out and build in one sitting. Larger ones becomes increasingly more difficult because the clay is going to want to slump. So you've got to get the timing just right where you can lift up that clay panel and it holds its shape, but it's not too dry to still slip and score.